meet today to discuss the path forward on gun legislation in the wake of the Uvalde shooting. Over the weekend, President Biden expressed some optimism about the discussions on Capitol Hill, telling reporters that he thinks lawmakers recognize that, quote, we can't continue like this. So for more on where the legislation stands and what to expect, we want to bring in CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Oh, Caitlin, I guess you always have to hang on to some optimism, but, you know, history has not indicated that we're going to see any major changes moving forward. Who is meeting today and what should we expect?
Good morning, Emery. Well, Chris Murphy is leading these talks. He's, of course, the Connecticut senator, and he is leading them actually joined by John Cornyn, who is a member of Republican leadership, a senator from Texas, who you remember went down to Uvalde to visit after the shooting. And he came back, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, actually tasked John Cornyn with working with Murphy to find some kind of framework, legislative framework on responding to this awful tragedy. However, it's important to note that what they are going to be talking about is likely to be very narrow. Chris Murphy, in an interview with our Face the Nation over the weekend, you know, he noted how difficult it has been to get any legislation through. He's, of course, been at the forefront after serving as the congressman during the Newtown shooting. But what they are looking at specifically is potentially tightening background checks and also looking at red flag laws. This is, of course, a way to get a court order to be able to confiscate a weapon from someone deemed mentally unfit either by the court or a medical professional. We've seen some of those red flag laws passed at the state level in some red states, actually. Remember, in Florida, after the Parkland shooting, Florida passed a law having a red flag law. But talking to lawmakers last week on Capitol Hill, I found that it is very difficult to get some kind of national legislation through. So when they're talking about red flag laws, they're really looking at this proposal by Lindsey Graham to provide federal grants to the states to try to incentivize the implementation of red flag laws. But look, the fact that John Cornyn and Murphy are meeting, they're meeting over Zoom, of course, because Congress is out of session, that has given some people who have been working on this issue for a long time some sense of hope.
Right. So let's talk about specific Republicans. You mentioned Cornyn on the other side, or the junior senator. I think Cruz is a junior senator, is completely in the opposite point of view on this issue. Caitlin, who are some of these Republicans that we keep hearing about that are potentially willing to talk to Democrats about sensible gun legislation?
Well, remember, Democrats are going to need 10 Republicans to get anything through this Senate. So that really narrows the field here, considering the Republicans that we've heard from. But, you know, they're eyeing the typical ones that we hear on these big issues, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, maybe a Mitt Romney, and some others. But again, the idea here is if it's a very narrow proposal, you might be able to get some Republicans on board. But I can tell you, I talked to a lot of Republican senators last week on Capitol Hill, and the refrain that I heard over and over again was that they don't want to push forward any sort of federal legislation on guns, even though, you know, I would ask, well, what about your colleague, Rick Scott, who signed gun restrictions into law as governor in Florida after Parkland? He raised the Florida legislature raised the age, the minimum wage to buy a firearm from 18 to 21. Scott signed that into law. They signed the red flag law into law. But, you know, so I would pose that to Republicans, and they would say that they don't want to see the federal government legislate on guns, that it should be a state issue. So there's still this resistance among Republicans on Capitol Hill to this. However, if it is a more narrow proposal, some of them are saying that that's something that they may be able to consider. But, you know, look at the public polling. You have wide bipartisan support for background checks. You have bipartisan support for, you know, doing something. You also have majority support in our poll for stricter measures. So we'll see what comes out today. But I should note, as we've talked about time and time again, the biggest impediment to legislation, especially on guns, is time. The more time passes, that is very difficult. And we know Congress is in recess, which makes this all the more difficult to get something done.
Well, you know, these funerals are going to be going on for a month.
Next 2 weeks, yeah, at least.
Well, yeah, exactly. So this will still be something that people, at least in the public, will be thinking about.
That's right. That's right. Caitlin, as
Absolutely.
always, thank you very much.